Erica.
Hi, Stacey. How are you?
I'm so good. Fans, today's episode is one that goes straight to the heart. So I'm honored to welcome Erica Neubert Campbell, breast cancer survivor, advocate, author, and a woman whose courage has created a ripple effect of hope for so many navigating one of life's most terrifying crossroads. So I actually first met Erica through a friend of a friend during one of the most vulnerable seasons of my life. I was facing my second round of breast cancer, frozen like a deer in headlights as I stared down this road of like, what could a double mastectomy be? And is there a life after it? And in that fear, Erica's strength, honesty, and honestly lived wisdom was a lifeline that I didn't know I needed. So I'm going to get choked up, but really, 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 it was serendipitous. There are no coincidences. Was such an honor. I'm fangirling her today. Is also what she calls a cancer orphan. So she lost her own mother to breast cancer more than 20 years ago. And since 1997, she has dedicated her life to supporting cancer patients and their families. But when she received her own diagnosis, everything she thought she knew suddenly became deeply, deeply personal. And that's what makes Erica's story so extraordinary. It's not just her survival, but it's the way that she chose to turn her experiences into service. So when she was diagnosed, a woman she barely knew did something completely unimaginable. I thought it was unimaginable when you told me, Erica, but now that I see myself and I live this world, it is truly unimaginable. This woman showed Erica her reconstructed breast after her mastectomy. And that one moment, that breathtaking moment of what she calls generosity, which is truly, truly generosity, gave Erica something priceless, which was a glimpse of hope. So now, through her memoir, The Mastectomy I Always Wanted, love the title, Erica is paying that gift forward. So her book includes vulnerable, rarely seen images before, during, and after reconstruction. The pictures, these very pictures, are what women desperately search for. I can tell you, sample size of one over here, this is what we're searching for online, but we can't really find it safely and not awkwardly. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So she wrote her book to be the friend that she wished that she had, the one that hundreds of women now have and will need in the years ahead. So, Erica, anything else about your journey before we dive in?
Stacey, I got to say that was the most generous introduction I have had. You know, the reason I do all this work is because of what you just said, which is the generosity I'd love to share with other women. So I'm excited to dive into that conversation. We're all in this together.
Yes. Yes, it is so true. And it is the loneliest, and we'll get there too, but it is a very, very, very lonely journey. And it is so
Yes.
intimate and personal. And so having someone to mentor you or to that's walked before is just such a gift. I was just researching something else the other day, and they were saying like the best person to talk to is the person that's 10% ahead of you on
Yeah.
everything. And I was like, that's brilliant. You don't want the person who's a year ahead, 2 years. Like you need the person that's been through it, who's 10% ahead of you. So I love that you're giving that gift to women who need it in that moment of outreach. So, okay. So let's start where any big energy spark story starts, which is with self-reflection. So you supported cancer patients for decades, as we said, but everything really shifted when it became your own diagnosis. When you look back at that now, what changed inside you the moment the journey became personal?
That is such a great question because, you know, again, since 1997, I had been doing volunteering, and a majority of my work was being a summer camp counselor, a sleepaway summer camp counselor for children with cancer. And, and then that transitioned into managing my mother's own journey. So by the time that I was diagnosed, you would think that I had all of the knowledge, all of the experiences. I had walked beside hundreds of kids and my own mother in a very intimate way. But I will say that when I got that phone call, the one where the doctor says, are you sitting down and do you have a pen? You have cancer. That phone call, I will say all of the preconceived notions I had about a cancer diagnosis changed because it, as you said, it becomes so personal, and it really brings up all of your own fears about mortality, about, what your body can and cannot do. And, what mindsets are you really living with? it identifies all of these things and they become spotlighted. So I think for me, it was not just a physical journey that I was about to embark on, but a mental journey, and one that I knew was going to take some really serious, deep reflections, and also just answering some of those biggest life questions that many of us do not want to answer, nor do we want to address. And a cancer diagnosis really brings those to the forefront. We have to face them.
Yeah.
And it's about, what's important in life and things like that.
It is so true. I don't think as many people know as I wish I would have known how emotional, psychological, spiritual, everything in addition to physical this journey is. And honestly, any type of illness. So we're talking about the thing that we've experienced, but there's so many more things that people are experiencing, and I think shining the light on that and reflecting on, you're right, it absolutely gives you this spotlight of like, have I done all the right things in my life? Do I have
Yes.
enough time? Have I been a good wife, mother, sister, daughter? You name the thing. And so it's sort of like it's crushing down on you at the same time that you're also like having this physical thing. And it's kind of seems like unfair, but it is life-changing in so many great ways in the end of it. But yes, that's so true.
Yeah. It's like I also envision it like now upon reflection, it was a dark tunnel where the door just opened and someone said, "You have to walk in, go." And, when you walk in, it is completely dark and you feel very alone. And eventually, you have to take one step in front of the other. And eventually you start to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But it is those first few steps that are incredibly lonely and incredibly terrifying, no matter how much preparation you had before. And that's what I reflected on.
That's so true. And then in terms of, because I know it is such, and I invite this, 'cause I know it's such a big part of your story, and I love that you've been really open with it, is losing your mother, right, to breast cancer. And that must have shaped so much of your experiences. So in your self-reflection period, how did her story influence your choices, your fears, and then your courage?
Yeah. I would say, again, when I got that phone call from the doctor, my first thought was, no, this is the beginning of the end, because obviously I saw my mother's journey, which had a very tragic ending. And it was very hard to disassociate her journey from the one I was facing myself. So that it colored all of my experiences. I mean, you might even know from your own experience with a relapse, like the second time, you know more. So while it wasn't my second time, it felt like it was, because I knew so much about the risks, the challenges, and what the journey ahead was going to bring. So yes, my mother's journey was not that it was necessarily unique. There's many women that have, certainly passed away from breast cancer. But I remember when she was near the end of her life, we were in the hospital. She was having some complications. It was the middle of the night, and a young doctor walked in, probably the person who was, got the short straw and had the overnight shift. He was very young, and he picked up he brought in my mother's file, which by this point, after a 4-year journey, was very thick, like paper-based back then. And he's flipping through, and he makes this comment, and he says, "Oh, this is interesting." And of course, my mom and I go, "What?
What? Yes.
What?" And he says, "Oh, if you had had a mastectomy at the start of your journey, you may not be in this position today."
Mm,
And, you kind of like, I was like, "I'm sorry, what?"
what?
Because, for those of your listeners who may not know, when you get in a breast cancer journey, you're often faced with a choice between a mastectomy, which is the removal of your breasts, and a lumpectomy, which is, sort of just taking that small lump out. Both are good options, by the way. And I don't discount, either option, but having that moment where he caused us to look backwards into that choice point. And it haunted me for years, Stacey. Like, it just haunted me for years, because that decision point, the road that goes two different directions. And so when I was diagnosed, then to your question, it was a very clear opportunity for me to rewrite the story.
Mm,
Or I absolutely came to that conversation, that decision point. I remember sitting with my doctor who said, "Erica, you will have the choice between a lumpectomy and a mastectomy. Which will you choose?" And I think he said I was the first person he's ever made the fastest decision, right? I was like, I'm going to choose a double mastectomy because of that conversation that I had had years ago. And I felt, really like it was an opportunity to redeem my mother's story. It was an opportunity to rewrite the ending and let go, actually, potentially for me, some of the guilt of a different choice that my mother had made. And so it became this, not just my own choice on a physical journey, but a choice to redeem her and have her life and her death mean something for me and change the way I would look at the journey ahead. It's a
That's so
really
beautiful.
intentional choice there.
Well, and it is too because I think when they give you that choice, I remember the first time I had it, they gave me the choice of a double mastectomy or mastectomy, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, "Are you crazy? Like, what are you even talking about? Like, I have this little cancer, and it's a small cancer and a slow growing cancer. Like, why would I
Yes.
take a sledgehammer to something that doesn't need it?" But even I reflect back and I'm like, wow, here I was 7 years later and I'm at the same place anyway. And so what if, and you can't what if yourself and hold that guilt. But I love the way that you turned it into an opportunity to say, like, okay, I have knowledge is power. And
Yes.
I want to live through this beautiful memory of my mother. And those two things together are how I'm going to make this very informed, very hard decision. And so I feel like she was there with you for that.
100%. And I don't think I realized, again, to your original question about reflection, I don't feel like I realized the toxicity that I was carrying for all those years after she died of that, what you just said, the what ifs. I was carrying the toxicity of those what ifs. And actually, this journey allowed me to release them, which I did not see coming.
Oh, that's so good. Abandoning it, right? Letting it go and being able to move forward. That's so good. So from reflection, a lot of times when we reflect, this is where the purpose comes out. So this is like part of my spark process here, but that purpose is really that deeper why, which you clearly are so firmly grounded in now. And so if I take you back to that moment again, where this woman, I just like this woman, like bravely showing you her reconstructed breasts, that was life changing. So how did that moment help clarify your purpose in helping and supporting women facing the path?
Yeah. So just to give your listeners context, I was working full time and I had announced to people at work that I was going to take time off for a double mastectomy. And I was tearful and all the things. After the meeting, this woman, by the way, was very new to the team. I did not know her very well, so almost like a stranger. And she pulled me aside and she whispered, I've had this surgery and double mastectomy years ago. Do you want to see what it looks like? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is professional work setting. I don't really know you, but yes, I do. Because it was that I couldn't find any pictures or what it would look like. So we found this bathroom off the beaten path, locked the door. She takes off her shirt. And Stacey, her breasts look so real.
Mm.
And I mean, I literally was like leaning in. I'm like, are you sure these are real? Her scars were so faint. And that was a transformative moment where I suddenly had hope. I suddenly was like, okay, I know this is going to be hard. I am, very clear this is going to be a very invasive, difficult recovery, a difficult surgery. But I know now what the end game looks like. And it did actually change everything in terms of the weeks and days before my mastectomy. You are full of tons of fear. And I let some of that fear go. It was such a generous gift, right? Complete vulnerability from a near stranger. And I remember in that moment, like you said, I was like, this is so rare. I don't know many other women who find themselves in this situation. And in that moment, even before my own mastectomy, was like, I think I'm going to want to pay this forward to somebody else someday. And so that's when I made the decision to start taking photos of myself because I didn't know it's not like in that moment I decided to write a book, but in that moment I knew in my future, given that 1 in 8 women get breast cancer, the chances that I would know somebody in my future to get breast cancer are pretty high.
Mhm.
And I was starting to document what it was like so I could share it with them.
So
And
take
that's
us
what
through
that
that
purpose
story because
looks like.
I think that's one of the you told me that story when I first met you, and I just loved that story. And it's a lot of it's in the book. But talk me through. You make that decision, and now you're fighting the fight, or whatever the words everyone loves hates different words. But you're on
Yeah.
the journey. You're on the path. Whatever it is.
I'm on the path.
Yeah, give us
Yeah.
the story of then how that unfolds with you documenting as you go along.
It started off, one of the pieces of advice from this woman was before you have your mastectomy, she's like, I know this is awkward, but take a picture of your breasts. She's like, and she actually offered this additional thing. She said, have a party for yourself, meaning like have a goodbye party, a farewell party to your breasts. And she's like, not like a party, but have some significant moments that make you feel that you can have closure with these body parts that have frankly been with you since you were a teenager, helped, birth my children or feed them. I was breastfeeding, all those things. So I did. I sort of had some moments, and one of them was just by myself. I didn't want anyone else to be a part of this. I did take some selfies. And because she also said, you will forget. It's not like probably most women don't have photos of their chests
Right.
bare, right? You have lots of photos in your iPhone, but none of that. And she was like, you're going to forget what they look like. And it might help you when you want to go through reconstruction. I was like, okay, I will do it, and I did have that moment where I like said goodbye to them.
Mhm.
It was the day before and it was kind of moving to be like, thank you for your service. Thank you for the years. Thank you for everything. And, so that was one part of it. And then I would say this woman was right. And I won't sugarcoat it, a mastectomy, and you'll know this, Stacey, is very hard.
Yes.
It's really painful.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was going to get better because I had seen this woman. I knew it was going to get better, but I didn't want to forget the pain. I didn't want to forget because I think that's it's really important to measure your progress to see like, there's a photo of me in the book that is one of the most vulnerable photos of the entire book. And it is me. And I remember it. I was in my lowest moment. And it was a few days after my mastectomy. I was in pain. I was not feeling well. And I was crying. I was sad, and I asked my husband to take a photo because I was like, I don't want to forget this. And he was like, again, why would you not want to forget this?
Right. Like, are
And
you
I said,
okay, girl?
are
Yeah.
you okay?
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to remember how far I have come. And so that to me is very powerful. And I want to give that vulnerability and that reality and that experience to other women so that you don't feel like when you have that moment, and most people do, I don't want you to feel alone. I don't want you to feel alone because I felt super lonely in that moment. My husband didn't understand. He's a wonderful man, but like, he's not going to understand. And he didn't have the drains coming out of him. He didn't have, the surgery. He was as kind as obviously and loving as anyone, but I didn't feel like anybody knew what I was going through. And of course, as I learned over time and I connected with fellow women, it became a very common that people go through that moment where you just sort of feel rock bottom. And again, my ethos is I want women to feel not alone. Like if I had known that that was a common experience, I think that would have been a little bit more helpful to get through it. So I took lots of pictures after that. Yeah.
Why do you think more people haven't done this? Because when I came upon you in my life and then this book, I was like, this is so brilliant. And even the doctors didn't have pictures. And so, and I'm not saying everyone needs to go share all the things all the time, but it's fascinating. So why do you think others haven't thought of this before? What do you think holds people's back?
Well, it's probably that's a great question, Stacey. It's probably hard and it's extremely vulnerable. And, again, being tremendously honest, I think a month before I published the book, like I did have this moment of like, oh my gosh, I am a professional woman and I'm about to release a book that could be seen by everybody I know of my bare chest.
Yes.
And I literally had like oh my God, what have I done? What am I doing? I mean, I had to go back to my higher purpose. I had to go back to the reason I'm doing all this is to support other women. But I did have a moment of like, Erica, what have you done? What have you done? What have you done? Are you ruining your own personal reputation? And, my higher purpose got me through that. But I did ask the doctor, I said, why don't other women, like, why doesn't this exist? And he said, most women don't feel comfortable sharing it. And I get that.
Yeah.
But I pushed through with a higher vision and a higher purpose.
I love that. I love it. And being vulnerable. And I'm a coach for a living, as you know, but in so much of coaching, the best coaching comes from when people are vulnerable. Like if you take that first layer off, we're all the same in so many ways, but we're all
Yes.
like got this armor around us and like we can't do this, can't do that, can't wear this, can't say this. You know what I mean? Things aren't appropriate. And I think when we're doing that, we're shielding or masking, we're cutting ourselves off from this like human connection.
Yeah.
So I commend you in how hard that was, and it's beautiful, and it is honestly such a gift.
I will say there's a lot of newly diagnosed women that have said, thank you so much. And that's my favorite part. Not that I need the gratitude, but that just that I know that I helped somebody.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So part of the process for me is all about like abandoning, right? So abandoning in leaving things behind that you don't need to take into the next season. And so this is all about like releasing fears, a lot of times old stories or narratives, but anything that no longer is going to serve us in these next seasons of like growth and like what we had, which was reinvention, rebuilding, all that stuff. So you shared how much fear surrounds these decisions that women are making. Like I
Yeah.
said, when he asked me the first time, I was like, "You are a crazy person. What is even wrong with you?" So there's so much fear, and I think fear cuts us off from entertaining opportunities too. But so, what beliefs, expectations, or fears did you have to abandon in order to make choices that were right for you?
Mm. I would say I'd put it into two categories. There were many things I had to abandon, Stacey. One was the physical, and then the other was the emotional and the mental. So the physical one is, as you can imagine, there's a large association of femininity with breasts. I even feel sometimes uncomfortable saying that, but I had to let go of I am not defined by my body. I am not defined by what I look like. And certainly, my breasts are just one piece of me. And my husband validated that. He was like, I'm still going to love you without those. And I do remember, for those of you who don't know, reconstruction often, not always, but sometimes is a slow journey, meaning, again, not to get technical, but they sort of reconstruct your breasts slowly over time. So they sort of like grow. I felt like I was a teenager on steroids. I go from flat chested to like full reconstruction and full breasts in 6 months, whereas, a teenager takes you years. But there was a point where I still was flat chested, but I was out and about in public and it was the summertime. And so I was wearing just like a t-shirt that was maybe a little bit tighter and nobody noticed, nobody cared, and I looked just fine.
Yeah.
And so when you sort of learn to abandon, like, people don't actually care as much as you think they do. And I had to abandon those feelings of everyone's going to say something or they're going to notice. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. I was flat chested. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
and there was a point I was like, why am I even bothering with this reconstruction? I look just the same. It was like I had to abandon all of these fears I had about not being fully feeling like a woman. I'll be honest.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is so much of it. Identity. People have work identities, where they have identities
Yes.
of I have a mom identity and I have a daughter identity, and I think we get so wrapped up in these identities, and I think it's beautiful to understand that they are fluid.
Yeah.
If we're open, we can say so. So it can reflect like on our relationships, our body, our family, our marriage, like I said. And however, we need to maybe shift to get rid of some of those identities when it matters most and
Yeah.
readapt in a new one. And in this case for you, your identity is like it's a higher purpose. And so
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What was the most surprising emotional or spiritual result of the reconstruction? Something you didn't expect, but now you really deeply value as a part of your story?
I would say it is what I talked about. It's almost the abandoning of the emotional side that I had to do. The most surprising thing was how much fear I was carrying and how many of those toxic what ifs I was carrying between when my mother passed away and then when I was diagnosed myself. So what was most surprising is fear of cancer I actually had. So even after my reconstruction was over, Stacey, I found myself really feeling so much anxiety about cancer relapse or cancer recurrence, or I would hear like a neighbor who got, a diagnosis, or a neighbor who even developed another condition. And I had this like, oh, I'm going to get it next. And I just lived in this constant fear. So I ended up, and I always talk about this in my book too, I ended up in some mental health therapy to really work through those anxieties. I had so much anxiety.
Mm,
And now, having worked through that and having made the choices that I made physically, it's been so surprising how much fear was holding me back,
mhm.
and how now I wouldn't say nothing scares me. That's not true,
Yeah.
but how much you can move forward when you abandon some of those things. So I did get some help from a therapist of like, when I hear somebody else who's diagnosed with something, I have a mantra. My mantra now is that's not my story. Like, I don't have to assume because my neighbor got a diagnosis that I'm going to. I have to say that's not my story. So what I realized was how much power and how much fear I was holding on by my own choices in my mind, and how much I could let go of just by making different thoughts, attitudes, different beliefs, different emotions that were all within my gift to choose. And I feel really, I'm so much lighter now.
Mm,
It's partly the reason I called it the mastectomy I always wanted,
mm.
because I actually made that choice to reframe it. That's just a simple reframe. I could be a victim and say, oh my gosh, I had this mastectomy pushed upon me and woe is me. I was in that place. I absolutely was in that place when I was first diagnosed. Again, my therapist helped me think about it. She's like, what if it was a mastectomy that you chose to, advance, your own health care, your own long-term survival rates? What if you made it something that you were like powerfully choosing rather than it's something being forced upon you? And I was like, I can do that? Oh, yes, I can. If I once I made it, this is my choice. I am choosing it. I own it. It is within my power and with my gift to make the decision to do this treatment. It actually released a lot of victim and fear and things like that. So that's actually part of the reason I named it that book.
I lo The reframe
Reframe.
is like the biggest gift ever. It was one of the first things I learned in coaching. I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is gonna go everywhere with me." So do you find yourself using the reframe on other things in your life now?
Yeah. All the time.
Exactly.
All the time. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell a really short story about
Yes.
a powerful reframe. So our fridge broke recently. And, it was like one of those weird things where it would just start beeping uncontrollably and, like, letting you know that it wasn't working. But, like, it was very sporadic. It was so annoying. And I'd be like, "Fridge," and we didn't have the time or the money to replace it. And then my son, he said, "Mom, what if you instead thought of it as a love alarm?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Every time that alarm goes off, it means someone that you love is thinking about you."
Oh, I love that.
And I
It's a
was like,
wisdom.
right? From, like, an 11-year-old?
Yes.
And I was like, "What?" And so, sure enough, with that reframe, every time the alarm in the fridge would go off, again, sporadically, I'd be like, oh, that's so sweet. Someone's thinking about me. And nothing in the environment changed. That fridge was still broken. That fridge was still having sporadic bells. But the only thing that changed was my reframe. And eventually, we, of course, replaced the fridge. And I missed that alarm.
That is such
I mean,
a good story.
right? Because I think about that all the time, the power of the reframe. Nothing changed except the way I thought about it.
Yes. Yes. I always try to tell myself, "How is this for me? How is this for me?" On my really bad days, what is the universe trying to tell me? What is my faith, trying to tell me? But I absolutely love that. You also said something around, like, advocating for yourself. Those weren't your exact words, but you did advocate for yourself to go get help through a therapist,
Yeah.
and you were operating at very high levels of anxiety, which I 100% understand. Very vulnerably, I will share, I just went to the therapist again from, like, my 3rd round, 3rd year in a row or whatever, new therapist, you're always trying to find the right fit, but I said to her, "I didn't realize how stinking lucky I was before I had breast cancer, I never had an ounce of anxiety." I never realized how blessed I was to not have anxiety. I never have had it in my life until I had breast cancer. And it is one of the most crippling, hardest things that I've ever had to, harder than the cancer for me, I might argue.
Yes.
So, as much as you're willing to share, I know so many of our listeners, they might not relate to the breast cancer piece, but they certainly can relate to this anxiety piece. What would you share just in terms of tools that have worked for you? We talked about the reframe, but any other tools that you would give the listeners in terms of working through those darkest days, those hardest days, those anxiety laden days?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I did work with my therapist to come up with some really powerful mantras
Mantras,
to just
yes.
like pause and like say what is really going on here, and then have a mantra that sort of calmed me. Right? When I would hear something, something negative, I would then have this like pause moment of like pause, and then what is a positive mantra that I can use, right? Like I would say things like, again, that's not my story was one, but the other one is you are not alone. Like, okay, Erica, you're not alone, or I am safe and I am healthy.
Oh, I
Like
love
that is
that one.
another really just simple powerful one. I had one that said I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. Or what's the other one I love? I'm loved by so many on this earth and those that have gone before me. Like, there's just like some mantras that you could create for yourself. And, you can create anything you want, but just to help you like reground on who you are and why it matters. I think the other thing I would just say about the mental health is the hardest part. I actually resisted it for like a year.
Mm,
Like, I was like, I don't need it. I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I'm
mhm.
totally fine. And my surgeon was the one who was like, seriously, I know you say you're fine, but you should do it. The hardest part was just actually making the phone call.
Yes, so real. Yes.
Once I made the appointment, that was the hardest thing. Going to the appointment, I was like, that was easy. And then when she asks you or he asks you a question, and it's really easy. So it was just so funny to me that like I was like, I stressed over this and I resisted it. And the hardest part was just making an appointment. The phone call to make an appointment. That was it.
It's so funny that you say that. I'm laughing because to go to my therapist last week, I wasn't sure if my insurance worked, and she was like 30, she's 30 minutes from me. Like, that's a legitimate drive. And
That
I
is a
still
legitimate
drove
drive.
there, and she goes, I tried to, email you back that it was or wasn't working, and you came anyway. I said, girl, it was so hard for me to make this appointment, and I drove 30 minutes. I was coming insurance or not paying this out of my pocket because that was the hardest part. Agree.
Hardest
And I
part.
say this again, not a doctor, but a lot of times I say, from a coaching perspective, a lot of times with my clients, I'll say, if there's an opportunity to look at the opposite of anxiety being action,
Yes.
if because I think so much of anxiety and so much worry is, and I know I kind of we're taking on a little path here, but thank you for inviting it. But I think so much is just the what if. So same like what if, what if, what if. And really the reality is like if we can start to pull that apart and say, well, let me do one thing that combats that what if. Let me try one or two baby steps. Just keep taking the tiny steps. Like you said, walking into that dark room or that dark tunnel and just knowing you're just going to put one foot in step of the other, at least then you know. Then you know the outcome, and that's kinda how I felt on my cancer journey was the more I knew, the more relieved I almost felt. It was almost the waiting for the result, waiting for the test. At least when you knew, you knew. And
Yes.
so I think there's a lot to be said about having and making those actions even when they feel the hardest and finding a space. And so I guess for the listeners out there that are feeling overwhelmed with anything at any time, maybe you have a friend sit down and help you make the phone call. I know I've done that before. Any advice
Yeah.
you have on that, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, an accountability partner on something that you're avoiding is an absolutely effective tool.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the other effective tool, if I think about it, is, and I also resisted this, so learn from my mistakes, is actually journaling. So I remember the nurse practitioner was like, "Oh, you're having anxiety and you're feeling a lot of stress through this diagnosis. You should write in your journal." And I was like, "Listen, buddy, if you think that all this is going to get solved by me putting some pen on paper, you're out of your mind."
Yes.
Turns out that person was right. I mean, again, I resisted for a long time, and the journal is what got me through my diagnosis. And in fact, it's what I pulled out when I wanted to sit down and write the book.
I was just gonna say, I can tell that. When I read your book, I was like, "Oh, this definitely has a journal, like, fold into it," which is beautiful because that's the journey that people are on with you.
Yeah, it's another piece of the vulnerability. I mean, Stacey, you've read the book. There's a section in there that's some poetry, and I'm not a poet. And that's the part I almost kept out of the book because I was like, this is kind of weird. It is people's favorite part, but it absolutely, my thoughts and my fears caused I had so much anxiety that my sentences were broken, meaning like I just wrote this like random words in the journal. And when I looked back on it a year later, I was like, oh, I didn't realize A, how broken I felt, but B, I was like, this kind of reads like poetry now. And it's people's favorite part of the book because it is so real and vulnerable. And it was in the moment activity.
It is so good, and I would argue you are a poet because I have read it, and it is brilliant. So, when we're gonna tell everyone at the end here how to pick up a copy of her book, but absolutely, it is such a rich, beautiful part of the experience, and I love it because it's the here and now where you were at in that moment, right? I think that was the hardest thing for me with my book is I do talk about my journey in the book too, and then I would love your perspective on this, and then I go and I do this book tour, and I'm feeling great, and I'm wearing the things, and my face is looking good, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of people around me, and dude, it was just such a beautiful, amazing experience. But what I wasn't prepared for is everyone was meeting me in the moment of the book when I was talking about cancer, and I was a year beyond it.
Yes.
And so that was really hard. And then even now when I see people how are you feeling? And I'm like, girl, I'm good. And so I think that's part of it too, is what we've written and what we've shared, vulnerable, but it's also like this lasting legacy, which is beautiful. But people recognize you as that moment in time. And how has that journey been for you? Because that's been a work in progress for me.
I would agree. I mean, now my mastectomy is now 7 years ago. And actually, it is interesting. I've been on these podcasts and, I'm sure some of your listeners may think, oh, well, she sounds really confident and really joyful. I'd be honest, I was not during that journey. You know, recently, it sounds funny. I've recently reread the book. I read my own book, reread it.
Yes.
And there are points where I'm thinking, I know that this is my own writing, but I cannot believe it is my own writing.
Yes.
I don't even recognize myself.
Yes.
And I think that's also what we talked about earlier. Like, you don't realize how far you've come
Yes.
until you look back.
Yes.
And yes, there are people that are like, how are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm great. I'm great. Because they've met me in the moment of that book.
Yes.
And you just, I kind of, I'm fine straddling both. It does have to take me back to those dark times. And it does take me back to like, oh gosh, man, it was a struggle. But then like you had said, there is some gratitude for that.
Mhm.
It is hard. I definitely did not see it in the moment. It was not, I didn't have this epiphany in the moment of like, I'm going to be grateful for this someday. Like, I can't say that, but I can say now, reflecting upon it, the spark moments of joy or of gratitude that were in a dark time.
And it's interesting because in the flip side too, there's also a whole group of people where you finish your mastectomy and finish chemo and, like, let's be honest, kids, people who depend on us, and they're like, "All right, let's go. Like, it's time to move on." And then there's still places where you're having those harder days. And so you just have to keep showing up. And so what worked for you? And I know you've got a big job and you've got a family and you've got friends. You have a very big, beautiful life. How did you keep showing up on those days that you didn't want to or that were really hard?
I was going to say, fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
I mean, I will say, like most, illnesses or diseases, a lot of it can be very invisible. So outwardly, of course, like I said, other than maybe a slightly flatter chest, now I look exactly the same. But in the beginning days, people forgot very quickly that like, oh, it's been 6 weeks, you're fine. And I was not fine. So sometimes, particularly in my close inner circle, like with my husband or my kids, I had to remind them, like, my kids would be like, Mom, can you pour the milk for me? And I was like, no, honey, I cannot. I cannot hold a gallon jug of milk. I literally could not because of the muscle that's needed for that. And so I just had to constantly remind people. But other times I just had to give them grace. Right? There's definitely an extended circle of people that just would know that I'd had this big surgery, but I had to give them grace. And then I had to also invest in my own self care, right? And make the choice to say, I don't really want to do that activity right now, and not have to say because I can't, but um, I'm going to go over here and, again, read a book or whatever I needed to do to decompress or to find the space to give them grace, if that makes sense. People
totally,
do
totally.
forget. And I understood, but it was hard and it was lonely.
Yes. And the other thing, and again, no matter what situation people are in, one of the hardest things to do, especially as a woman, and I know we all suffer from it, is asking for help. And I think the thing that was just mind-blowing for me on this journey was it's a tribe. You've got the radiologist, you've got an oncologist, you've got the surgeon, you've got the plastic surgeon, you've got the nutritionist because you gain the weight from the things, and you've got the therapist now because your head's like, ah. And so it is a tribe of people, and you do need to ask for help. Like, any advice for people on if you did ask for help? I'm assuming you had to, what that
Oh,
looks like
yeah.
for you and any tools people could borrow from you.
I mean, I would say, I'm an extremely independent woman, but I was also sort of the rock of the family. Not being able to be that was jarring for me and jarring for the people around me. And you're right, I had to ask for help. In the past, I would not. I'd be like, oh, I got this. I got this. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Leave it to me. All of those statements. And yeah, I had to get really comfortable with asking for help. And I will say, I had a friend who helped me ask for help, if that makes
It
sense.
does. The middleman, like someone in between to kinda help buffer. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
She was like, "I know you don't like to ask for help, so let me do this." In fact, it's in my book. My friend was like, "I'm going to interview you and I'm gonna ask you what you need, and I'm going to then type it up and I'm gonna share it with everybody."
I
So
loved
my friend absolutely did this. She made an FAQ of like, "What does Erica need?" And, "How can you help?" And, "What should you say? What should you not say?" Like, she went through it was another really rare gift. She's like sort of a very organized project management person. She was like, "We're going to make an FAQ." And that way I actually received the exact help I needed because my friend made me sit and think about what specific needs I needed and to be very clear about what I needed. So I didn't, I said things like, "I don't want flowers." Like I was like, then you have to like they die and then that's not the feeling I want to have in my house. So I was like, I would like I wanted motivational plaques instead. You know
perfect.
what I mean? The kind that you hang on the wall, you put on the shelf, like, I was like, those are gonna those mantras will be far more effective for me than a bouquet of flowers. So, like, even little things like that, right? I was able to be really clear and specific with what I wanted and what I needed, and I needed a friend to make me do that so I didn't feel so uncomfortable. That's, asking for help is a struggle, sort of stereotypically for women, but in those situations, you're kind of forced to have to do it, and I encourage you again, you can read the book, you can see the FAQs my friend made for me and interviewed me.
Yeah,
So,
and I
yeah.
think being specific, right? It's so funny because I help a lot of people find jobs as a part of my business, and I'm always like, if you want someone to refer you, you need to tell them specifically what it is that you're able to do and what you want from them. And so I completely agree in terms of help, like being very clear. Like we didn't want meals. Like the first time we had meals, the first time I had cancer, and it was a hot mess because I don't cook, by the way. I have a gourmet kitchen. I don't cook. I don't do grocery shopping. My husband lives his best life in that kitchen. And so when everyone was pulling up, bringing all these meals, he's like, I don't want all these meals. Like, this is not helpful for me. And so the second time around, I, like you, had a very, very wonderful best friend, and she put together this whole thing and ways to help do all these things for me that were not food related, that could give us the gift of what we actually needed in those moments, and said, like, okay, we really respect that. And so that was really a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
One of the other things is kinetic energy is like something I talk about all the time in my book. And this is really like the forward motion and the forward motion of your story that creates magic for you and for others. And so throughout your book and your story, you've created this beautiful, safe, honest space when women are seeking answers at 2 a.m., which is so real because that's when we're up, just like the brain's turning. We've been hijacked. There's like science that therapists know about, but it's a real thing. You can't problem solve in that moment, but you are actively wanting answers. And so, what movement or momentum do you hope that your book kickstarts?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I talk about like there's three energies that I really hope that my book creates. Number one, we talked about is you are not alone. Like that's the energy I really want to put out there because I know, and Stacey, when you are newly diagnosed, you feel so alone. No one else has the same situation. No one else has the same circumstances, but yet you will over time find those people. So number one is you are not alone. Number two is never give up, right? Because you are in that moment where you're like, no, and it feels so bleak. It's that start of the darkness in the tunnel, and you have got to put one foot in front of the other. So that's the energy that I want to say is just hang on and know that it will get better. So do not give up. And the third one is sometimes my favorite, which is trust the process.
Mm,
Trust is such an important part of the journey. You have to trust your physicians, you have to trust your family, you have to trust near strangers because I think about how often like a nurse will walk in and be like, I'm about to give you this anesthesia. And you're like, okay, I'm going to trust you to do that. Okay, great, let's
yeah.
go. But even trusting the process after a surgery and trusting the healing that you may not see every day, but every day gets a little bit better. You have to trust that the twists and turns in the journey are all part of the process. And that is also super hard. It's very easy to see in the rearview mirror. But if you look about any challenge, again, not just a cancer diagnosis, any challenge in your life, I guarantee if you looked in the rearview mirror and thought all those step backs, all those, diversions off the path, they were part of the journey you were meant to be on anyway. So trust that process. And I really want people to invest in that as a mantra and an energy in a cancer journey in particular.
It's so good, and you talk a lot about hope too, and trust
Yeah.
that that the hope will get you there. I
Yeah.
remember one point that them all saying, "You're gonna be back to more almost normal, like, whatever," and I remember being like, "That's never gonna happen." And those dark days with the drains and all that, like, awfulness, all the drugs and stuff, and then, all of a sudden, it was, like, 6 months later, and I was bowling with my family, and I picked up a bowling ball and I was bowling. And I was just didn't even realize. And then my husband goes, "You're bowling." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm bowling." Like I just like I don't know if it's 6 months, 8 months, like don't
Yeah.
quote. It was just this shocking thing of like, wow, I if I just trusted that there would be hope and I trusted in that hope, there is another side to all of these things. Like you said, no matter what it is that you're going through.
Yeah.
The other way I like to think of it too, and I think this goes with reframe too, is sometimes there are unexpected gifts. Sometimes
Yeah.
these really freaking hard journeys are exactly the gifts that we need to be able to create the ripple effect. And so, what unexpected gifts came from your experience, the ones that you never could have predicted, but now feel are like an ingrained part of your purpose?
I love this one. I say cancer is a club you never want to join, but when you get there, you meet the most amazing people, right? Stacey, you and I met through this cancer journey, and you are one of the most amazing people.
Same.
And I feel so grateful for that. The tribe of people that I have created since my diagnosis of people who either are supporters or survivors has been an incredible gift. That has been such a gift. I have a group now of breast cancer survivors that live in my, sort of neighborhood. We call ourselves the breasties,
Yes.
and like I love them because, we have this shared understanding of like what it's like.
Yes.
And so I think the community of support, you talked about vulnerability as a connector. And because cancer patients, we have seen some really dark things and been through some really hard times, that it opens up a little bit more vulnerability, especially when you meet a fellow person. Again, the way you and I have connected, the way others, I'm sure in your net have been part of your incredible journey, and I never would have met them otherwise. So that's my favorite unexpected gift is the humans that are vulnerable, compassionate, and so connected to me through this journey.
I 100% agree. I love that. I love this notion of this club that you don't want to be in, but wow, the members are so amazing. I was trying to sell
Yeah.
our RV a year ago and I met two of the women that were trying to buy the RV. We're both breast cancer survivors. And one of them bought it, one of them not. And I'm still like besties with both of them. And it's so
Right.
funny because we keep connected all the time and I'm connected with their one of them runs a charity and so I completely agree. It's just like it's a beautiful club. I guess the last thing I would love, love, love you to share is for any woman who's out there who's been recently diagnosed today, whether it be breast cancer or something of that magnitude, what is one piece of advice that you would give them to move forward?
I mean, I think maybe it's an extension of what we just talked about, which is find your tribe, right? Because again, you feel so alone in the beginning. And there are incredible resources out there now, whether it be online or in person. I guarantee, even though you may feel like you have the most unique diagnosis or the most unique situation. I'm a single mom, so nobody else will know what it's like. Or, you know, this is my fourth cancer. No one else will know what it's like. That's not true. You are not alone. There is someone else out there. So I encourage you to keep looking and finding. Those people will come to you if you keep out there and looking to find your tribe. Because the only way you will get through this is by finding other humans to connect with.
So good. Okay, where can they find you? Where should they go to buy your book, to see you speak, to hear the things?
Yes. So my book is currently available on Amazon. So you can go to the search function and type in Mastectomy I Always Wanted. I also have my own website, which is my full name. It's ericaneubertcampbell.com. And it's okay if you spell it wrong, it should come up. Certainly, if you even type in Erica Campbell mastectomy, that you'll find me there.
Perfect.
And please follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Those are the main places that I spend a lot of time sharing about this journey. I am open. I also on my website, you can get my contact me information. I respond to all messages. I love hearing from people, and I have spoken in different places. I don't have anyone coming up right now, but lots of opportunities to connect.
Thank you so much. And I will put the links in the show note, everyone, too, so that everyone can see that. But Erica, has been an absolute honor to walk beside you on this journey, to learn from you, to have you as the person 10% ahead, that I can know that there's hope and trust in the future. And what you're doing is amazing, amazing work. So thank you for being on the show, and bless you.
Thank you so much for all of your big energy, Stacey. I love it.
Thank you.